G'day to you. My name is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. The owner of this channel, Jonathan Sale, suggested that I should get hold of a guy called Nick Beale, who's an interesting fellow and has a lot of stories to talk about on his podcast, which you can find at nickbeale.substack.com. Quite a mouthful, but I'm sure John will be putting a link to him. Inside there, he's got writings called Shendrick's Scribblings or something like that. His own audio podcasts and, in fact, visual ones as well, videos. It was in there that I glanced Hugh and saw a brief synopsis of his story, which I think we'll find interesting. And for any person of our age, his surname will be synonymous with a well-known cricket player. But yeah, thanks very much to John and Nick for getting Hugh on board, and indeed to Hugh himself. Hugh, welcome to the channel. It's, as I said before we started, you've got such a familiar face. Maybe during the course of your talk, we'll find out we were crawling out the same pubs together or something. You never know. But welcome on board. And can you give us an overview of where you come from and that type of thing?
Okay, Tony, thanks very much. I must say I was a little surprised to be invited. As I said to you, I was a Bakshi rifleman and, not the illustrious type of military career, but I did my service and also worked up in Tepa in Mt Darwin for several years. So I was exposed to the war as a farmer. But I just thought I would just give a little bit of background to who I am. I was born in Bulawayo in 1954 to my parents, Pat and Bessie Bland, who were farmers in the Shangani area. But if I sort of go a little bit further back, I think it's quite interesting in that my great-great-grandfather came out to South Africa as an orphan in 1825, and he ended up in Mossel Bay, and he ended up marrying Katharina Frederica du Plessis, who was a French Huguenot descent, but obviously had been integrated into the Afrikaner community. He did extremely well there, and he had a number of children, one of which was my great-grandfather, who left Mossel Bay and settled in Harrismith for a while. He was Benjamin Adam Bland. It gets quite confusing because they seem to use the same names. But he then moved off to Barberton and settled on a farm, Bromers Creek in Barberton. He wasn't mining, he was farming. It was prior to the sort of gold rush. And in fact, Barberton was known as Blandstown until the Barbers took over. So, and that I've confirmed in the museum there, and there's a Bland Street in Barberton. But my grandfather was then born there. Sorry, not born there. He grew up there, and his parents died at a very young age. He was orphaned at 19, and he had two younger sisters. But he got very involved with the transport riders, amongst others. Percy Fitzpatrick was there before he went into politics. Meikle was there, but he ended up working for Pat and Duncan Mackenzie. Now, Duncan Mackenzie then became Brigadier General Duncan Mackenzie later in the war. And there was a bit of I suppose there must have been a little bit of tension in that my great-great-grandfather's granddaughter married Louis Botha. His daughter was Helena Aletta Bland, who married an Emmett, the Irish, I think a descendant of the Irish rebels, and their daughter Annie married Louis Botha. So he was working for what would become a member of the Natal Carbineers, and obviously some of his family were tied up with the Bothas. Anyhow, for quite a long time, he did transport riding between Natal and Salisbury, and also between Barberton and Delagoa Bay, as it was called then. It became Lorenzo Marques, and then obviously now Maputo. He he then, Salisbury was sort of cut off by the rebellion, and Duncan Mackenzie sent about 10 spans of trek oxen up to Beira, which they then shipped up by boat up to the railhead that went to Chamoya. And he then was taking these 10 span of oxen on the way to Salisbury, as it was at the time. And of course, the rebellion had broken out, and the rinderpest had also broken out. So, excuse me, he was sort of caught up in the middle of this. But Salisbury at the stage had been isolated for a long time, and he eventually left Chamoya, got to Mutari, Tali, and then was making his way to Salisbury. They were ambushed on the way. Pat Mackenzie, Duncan Mackenzie's brother, lost his finger in an ambush by, I think it was Mutasa or someone like that. And a field force did come out to meet them, and they eventually got to Salisbury. But sadly, he lost most of his oxen to the rinderpest. Some of them salted, in other words, became immune. But the British South Africa Company commandeered them for their own use because they were highly sought after. It was then that he had met Thomas Meikle, and between them they bought the farm that I grew up on, which was at Shangani, and it was a 6,500 acre ranch. And Thomas Meikle was very good to my grandfather and helped him out. But he was a bit of a loose sort of cannon. He had this idea that the El Dorado was out there, and he married my grandmother in 1904. The farm, incidentally, had been the farmer who had owned the farm prior was a guy called Robert Gracie, who was murdered in the actually Matabele rebellion on the farm. So it was bought from that estate. But he was, as I say, he had a bit of a loose, he felt there was gold to be found somewhere, and he spent a lot of his time prospecting. He worked for George Pauling on the Somabulla Road railway line when it was put through. And my poor grandmother, she sort of had to run the farm, but she became sort of the matriarch of the district and quite well known. But obviously, 4 children were born to that marriage. The eldest was my dad. The second was Lindsay Bland, who ran Pioneer Engineering Works for a long time in Salisbury. The third brother was Brownie Walker Bland, or Brown. He's the father of Colin Bland. And then the younger brother was Joe. And Joseph got married, but he volunteered for the RAF and ended up in 9th Squadron RAF. And sadly was killed in April 1943. I have subsequently visited his base at Waddington and Bardney, and I also I got a first-hand account of his downing on the French-Spanish border near Saint-Jean-de-Luz. They were laying landmines, and there was 2 aircraft involved, and they flew around the lighthouse, and they were ready for them. So they shot my uncle's plane down, and he was never seen of or heard of again. So I visited that site. I actually found old ACAC positions and gun positions at Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which probably were responsible for his downing. But that's just a little bit of the history.
Yeah.
Do you want me? Okay. My dad took over the farm because my grandfather wasn't really interested. He was more interested in gold mining. Incidentally, when I did some genealogy, I found out that my grandfather, although his name is Bland, was 75% Afrikaner because his mother was a de Villiers and his grandmother was a Du Plessis. So having thought that I was a pure Engelsman, I found out that I actually have quite a strong Afrikaner blood in my veins as well.
Exactly the
which came as a
same.
surprise to me.
Exactly the same as me, Hugh. I had a DNA test done in January through my daughter, and it turns out I have got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Afrikaans relatives through my mother and grandmother. They were the Vissers. So,
Okay.
well, I'm Rock Spider and Pom as well.
Yeah, my cousin who came from one of the other sons claims that I also have some slave blood in me as well. But I haven't had the DNA test to verify that. So
Yeah.
maybe there'll be some more surprises in store for me. But yeah, so my dad went onto the farm. He was there from about 90. He went to Plumtree, and I think 1917, finished there in 1924. And he then went onto the farm and died on the farm in 1978. So he lived his entire life on Thornville Farm in Shangani. That's obviously where I was born and grew up. And like all young Rhodesian guys who grew up on farms, we did a lot of hunting and started with a Diana pellet gun, then a 22, and then a shotgun, then a 303. But at age 7, I was shipped off to Rhodes Estate Preparatory School, reps. I finished there in 66, and you referred to Nick Beale. He got us, as many of us together as he could, to get our biographies, and he put them all together. And of course, there were a few missing in action, none actually from military reasons, just, there'd been some casualties along the way. But he did get the obituaries, and of course, my podcast was on his site, which you referred to. After reps, I then, like many of the guys, went to Plumtree. So I was at Plumtree from 1967 to 1972. I then did my national service in intake 129, which was the first national service intake that actually they hived off quite a lot of the guys to the RLI. I didn't go there. I stayed at Llewellyn Barracks. But we were the first national service intake to be used on external operations and in obviously Op Hurricane area. When I finished we were just about to clear out of the army, and I mean, I can bring up anecdotes and what have you, but I think I want to focus a little bit on farming. But we were just about to clear out when a whole lot of the guys got cholera. And we were quarantined at Makuti for, and missed our sort of, we had to add a few days onto our calendar until we'd all been treated. But there was a sort of a sequel to that later down the line. I then went to university, had too much of a good time. I won't go into the details. But so I ended up in Salisbury looking for a job. And my first interview was with people selling children's books. And I said to them, are these encyclopedias or not? And they said, no. And yeah, after an hour, they disclosed it was encyclopedias. So I sort of lost my top a bit and had a few beers at the Windsor Hotel, got home and picked up the newspaper, and there was this advert for a farm manager in Matepa. Now, I desperately needed some work, so I arranged an interview, I think at the Windsor Hotel, if I remember correctly.
And what year was that, Hugh?
That was 74, end of 74. And I was interviewed by the Cockers, Bob and Karen Cocker from Matepa. I didn't realize what was going on at the time, I mean, I knew what was going on because I'd been in the military in 1973, but I didn't realize how things were warmed up a little bit. And so I got the job, and I was quite surprised. And I sort of realized that not a lot of guys were volunteering for farm manager jobs in the area. So I ended up working there for right through to end of 77, on and off. So I I had some interesting times as a farm manager in the Matepa area. It was obviously just south of Mt Darwin, between Choeshi and the Madziwa tribal trust land. So it was a quite a hot area. And my first inkling of the severity of the sort of situation was we all rode motorbikes because they ostensibly didn't hit the landmines or set the mines off unless they'd been sort of jimmied a bit. So we all went on motorbikes. But my first morning I went out and I was stopped by the engineers. They were clearing the road with prodders between Matepa and to the west towards Choeshi. And every morning they had to clear the road before I could get to the lands. So then I realized, okay, this is a bit more serious than I thought. And so it was sort of a bit of a wake-up call. But I think the biggest wake-up call came in 1976. We didn't carry weapons for a while because we thought it was sort of showing weakness, to carry weapons. Well, one of our farmers down the road, Frank Pitcher, was brutally murdered outside his barns by a guy called Indaringi. And I've sent you photographs or newspaper cuttings. He claimed that he was impervious to bullets. But eventually the Mvokwi's party caught up with him and proved that he wasn't right. But he had done a lot of damage in the district. And that's when we started carrying weapons for the first time. And obviously we had the normal array of weapons, Browning shotguns and FNs that were issued to us. But I had an old Boer War Webley and Scott 455 with dum-dums in it. And I used to have it in my holster, and driving the motorbike, I used to practice, the draw, in case I got ambushed. Fortunately, I was never in a position where I was ambushed. But the district was quite hot. I would be out in the compound at 4:30 in the morning, waking the guys up, chasing them up, and sending tractors and trailers in because we were doing tobacco, cotton, and maize, and into the lands. And I can relate an incident. The one day I just heard this massive explosion, and the workers all said, Duma, it's thunder, but it actually was what had happened is a military vehicle had hit a landmine next to a grid. These guys had sown the landmine right next to the iron grid, so the engineers had missed it. And unfortunately, one of the guys lost his legs on that. Another bad time was also in 1977, I think it was, 76 or 77. I was in the lands and I just heard choppers going and firing going on. And, I was quite a long way off, but there was a contact going on at Roya Falls, which was up the road from Matepa. And sadly, two of the party guys were killed, Norman Payne and Peter Creamer. So it was a bad day for us. So I'm just relating some of the incidents that happened. The one morning I was going down to the staff compound, and this guy ran up to me and he said, "Hey, there, geez," in the compound, guerrillas. So I sort of backed off, and the fire force came in from Darwin, and it was very impressive. I mean, these guys came and they about 3 or 4 choppers, and they circled the compound and circling around and just keeping top cover. And then one of the choppers dropped down into the ground and the troops are out. But it unfortunately was a lemon. The guys had run off. They had been there. We had an incident where our tractor missed a landmine, but the trailer behind hit a mine. It was full of gun poles and our staff were on top. We lost one chap. Ironically, he didn't die. He died of tetanus. He went to Bandura Hospital and died of tetanus. So they removed his foot and then he died, and I had to go and pick him up and what have you. So there were incidents like that. The one night we were all together, usual situation. You had to do the agric alert and report in mornings and evenings, but this guy ran up from the compound, jumped over the fence and said there are guys in the compound again. So we called out the reaction force it was at night, from Bandura, and they came out and they went through the drift just outside the compound, and we just heard firing going on and screaming and swearing and shouting. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The vehicle was a soft-skinned Land Rover, been sort of whacked up a bit with armor-piercing AK rounds. But this was this chap in Doringi who I've referred to before, who was later caught up with.
And Hugh, were you on that farm all on your own, or just with the other?
No. I lived with the family.
Okay.
And I mean, I have to say, because the Corin, who was Bob's wife, she was actually a beauty queen from South Africa, and Bob was a good looking chap, and anyhow he managed to hook her, and she came up to the farm and stayed there right to the very end. Never went back, never complained, and I mean those are the true champions, were those farmers' wives.
Oh yes.
They were often on their own when we were out in the lands, or sometimes when we went off for a bit of a party with some of the neighboring farmers at night. I mean, we were stupid sometimes, but those women were strong, and one has to really admire the strength of those people on those farms, and Corin was no exception.
I would like to actually put an appeal in here to anyone in the audience who's listening to this. Farmer stories, particularly from wives, is something I'm really interested in interviewing and recording. So if you feel you'd like to bring your story forward, please do. It's a very welcome topic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Carry on, Hugh.
Yeah, so these women were having to put up with a lot. They were brave. Strangely, there wasn't fear. There was obviously concern. I don't think I ever felt fear. I was too bloody stupid. Too young and stupid, I think. Maybe my imagination didn't work hard enough. But I mean, there was a lot going on. Our very good friend down the road, Peter Starling, he was coming along to see the cockers, and he was ambushed on that road, and he was shot up. He lost his one son, killed, and his other son, that was Gavin Starling, 3 years old, and his brother was also injured, young brother. So that was also a really bad incident. And there were a couple of farmers killed in the area, Basil Cairns, Len Brooks. So there was a lot going on. We had another farmer up the road, Kevin Fallon, Kevin and Mac. They were sort of on the border with Madziwa, so they were always in trouble. He got ambushed. He lost his finger as well. Strangely, that's the second finger. But it was interesting because, obviously all the farms had security fences around, and Kevin had about half a dozen Ridgebacks, and he used to get his cook to beat the fence outside, and these dogs would go absolutely bonkers trying to get to him. And the only way he could get into the house was with Gavin or his wife Mac taking them into the house, because they'd have torn them to pieces. So there was quite a lot of security. The dogs were very important. So if dogs were barking, you sort of shined up a bit.
Hugh, I'm sure in addition to that, you actually found it quite exciting. I mean, I was out in some areas like that where at night, particularly in the summer, where you would have the sparkle of lightning on the horizon, and it's dark outside the lights, and you've got this tension of not knowing what's going to happen, and you can hear the crickets going, and the dogs are sort of on patrol. It generates quite an amazing feeling inside of you that lasts for the rest of your life. And you're not inside just playing cards and playing the piano, are you? You're sort of on semi-alert all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, it was going into the compounds in the morning and also curing in the barns. We had to go out at night to check the barns. And I mean, that you were very vulnerable in those situations. So you did a bit of a recce around the barns, but it was no sure thing that you had found everything there. Fortunately, neither Bob or myself were attacked in that manner. So we were lucky. In fact, our farmhouse was one of the few in the whole area that wasn't actually attacked, quite strangely. I mean, I don't know what it was, just luck or whatever. But, we were prepared. We had grenade screens on the windows, and you had your shotgun or FN by your bedside, always carried a weapon. So you were on the alert. And I mean, these guys, we used to give them chibuku, like a 44-gallon drum of chibuku. They'd come and it'd be taken down to the compound. It was their sort of like treat, to be given then the drums would start going ba-dum, ba-dum, and you sort of wondered, what are these acts up to, what are these messages going out or something? So your imagination does run away with you a little bit.
Just so exciting
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And when you say the weapons were issued to you, did that come from the police or internal?
Well, I mean, I was on call-ups, so I was with 1 Rhodesia Regiment. They left me alone for quite a while, but I had the weapon, and they left us alone because at one stage there were about 15 farms in the area that were abandoned, and all the guys were away, and that's when obviously a lot of the work was done by the local guys who knew the area, and they weren't being called away from their farms because, that's when things happened. So, they were issued to us by the army and the police. And as I say, I had my weapons from my call-ups. As I say, they left me alone for quite a while because I was on the farm, but eventually, manpower was becoming short. And so I ended up on continuous call-ups for
our foreign viewers who may not know the system in the bush, Part 2 were the police anti-terrorist unit, and they'd often be drawn from men in the areas that they served in. As Hughes just said, they were familiar with the country, they knew the ins and outs of the people and the land, and so they would come together in units of 4 or 8 or whatever, and actually patrol their own farms, and they were very effective, don't you think, Hugh?
Yeah. No, I mean, they did a really good job, knowing the areas and knowing each other as well and trusting each other. On call-ups, you could end up with the different guys in your stick each time you went in. But those guys worked together, so they knew each other and they trusted each other. So they were very effective, those guys. And a lot of them lost their lives, unfortunately, in the process. But, to go back to the district, the cohesion amongst the people was amazing. We took a lot of chances. We went out at night for beers and drinks and what have you. Good old shumba had to be had. But the actual cohesion amongst people was very strong. If someone was in trouble, then there would be a response by the farmers in the area. And so, I look back on my time there with a lot of fondness. They were formative years in my life in a way, because I was young. I was 21, 22, and I had a big job to do. And under those circumstances, it I think, set me up to know that life's not easy always. You've got to have your fun when you can. But I have a lot of admiration for those farmers. I also came from Shangani, which sort of at the tail end of the war was seeing the problems. We used to have a gymkhana every year, and the 1 year at Shangani gymkhana at the club, the guys attacked the club. Fortunately, everyone was armed, so they returned fire. But sadly, a little 3-year-old girl Leanne Phillips, was killed in that attack, and it started to sort of warm up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was away at the time, and my dad died in 1978, and someone phoned me and they said, "Look, your dad's passed away." So I said, "How did it happen?" Because the first thing that came to mind was he'd been attacked, but he had died of natural causes. But he was a fine shotist. He was only 72 when he died, but I used to go down to the range with him doing Bisley. And so I said to him, "Dad, are you okay?" And he said, "No, I'm confident." And I found afterwards a little map of the house, showing the safe zones and where to hide and where not to go. It was just my mother and my father. So he was sort of prepared, but I mean, vulnerable, nevertheless. But I was very pleased to know that it wasn't by guerrillas.
And did that result in your mother having to move into town, or where did she go?
Yeah, my dad had given up farming a couple of years earlier. The armyworm had just wiped out the grazing in a week. It was incredible. He was carrying about 500 or 600 head. Armyworm came in and wiped all the grazing out. Within a week, he had to sell his entire herd of cattle to the Cold Storage Commission. And at that stage, he was 66 or 67, and he just said, "That's it." So he released the farm, and I had to move my mother off the farm. She couldn't stay on the farm on her own, which was very sad, because it had been in the family a long time. And I ended up selling it in 1980 to the Bordens, who were our neighbors. The Bordens are quite a notorious family. They were very good. I was very good friends with them, as was our family. But as you probably might remember, Barry was locked up in Chickaruby for about 12 years, and the two other guys were longer, for putting a bomb in the ANC headquarters. So he paid a heavy price for what he did. And I think a lot of guys were like that. They didn't realize, that the war wasn't over, when it was 1980. A lot of them joined recce's and what have you.
And of course, the other side of the coin with the African staff that had been so loyal to the farmers, they were just chucked into a ditch in many cases, really through no fault of anybody. And they really struggled and battled, and a couple of million in the end lost their livelihood.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've revisited Bob and Karen in Matepa. Must have been 1990. And Bob said to me, "They're going to take our farms." I said, "Bob, man, no." And while I was up there, who was it? Turaropa, what was her husband's name? That was a nom de guerre. He was the head of the army in Zimbabwe, arrived when I was there and demanded cattle, which, Bob wasn't selling, but he knew that he arrived in a Unimark with a whole lot of military, and he said, "These guys are going to take our farms," and they did eventually. They had 24 hours to pack up and go. Most beautiful farm. And all those guys lost their jobs. My sister was farming in Arcturus, and she had bought the farm after 1980, and she had to get a certificate of non-interest from the Zimbabwe government before they could buy that farm, which ironically also had been owned by a guy who had disappeared off that farm. And despite the fact that they got permission to buy that farm after 1980, they were one of the first farms to be invaded in March 2000. And they burnt my mother's cottage. Fortunately, she wasn't there. And they threw them off the farm. But my sister was Dairyman of the Year in 1995, I think it was. And they eventually told them to go back onto the farm because she was milking 700 dairy cows that she'd built up. My brother-in-law was doing the agriculture, and she had built this herd of dairy cows up. My nephew's still on the farm, half the farm. But yeah, a lot of this, initially the staff actually attacked the war vets who came onto the farm because they didn't realize the implications of what was going on. They didn't realize that this was coming from the very top. So they then came back in force, and anyhow, they got the farm back.
It's terrible. If I could just interject with a little story of my own as well. When I was a building contractor after the 80s, I built a beautiful big farmhouse for the Nichols up in the Blanket area. Now, they had farms from Easter Blanket all the way up to Sonoya, massive farms. And this one was run by Patrick. I think it was about 8,000 acres of wheat. It had something like 4 or 5 center pivots. It had 4 grain silos. They had their own 20 or 30-ton trucks that used to ride under there. And I built a magnificent house for them. Everything was imported. Beautiful, beautiful house. And I'll tell you, they were given 8 hours to evacuate. You can't comprehend that.
No.
You just cannot comprehend that. It was the most beautiful farm I've ever seen.
Yeah, look, I mean, the farmers up there were good. In fact, Bob sadly passed away. And he had 3 sons and a daughter, and they're all up in Zambia now. And the 3 boys are farming up there and doing well.
And Zimbabwe's importing the food from them, aren't they? Zimbabwe's importing the very food that they...
Well, I think the country's in dire straits this year, thanks to the drought. So, yeah, it's very sad what happened up there. But you were talking about some anecdotes. One that I can laugh about now, but I didn't at the time, but it's in my book, which will be coming out shortly. Whilst, I prided myself on my weapon handling because I'd been brought up with weapons. And we used to go out into the garden at night because the kudu used to jump in there, or sometimes the jackal, or rabbits. And so I went out there the one night with a shotgun, and I think I was quite young. I was, I think, about 16. And, the darkness does things to your imagination. Anyhow, so I saw these eyes, and I thought they were a jackal or something. So I let rip with both barrels of this shotgun, and this bloody cow jumped up, bellowing off into the distance. But it was in our garden, which it shouldn't have been, but it was our tenants, the guy we had leased the farm to, so I had to sheepishly go in. I mean, I was so embarrassed because, as I say, I prided myself on weapons, and I said to my dad, I've just shot one of Dion's cows. And he knew.
Did it actually die?
Yeah, it did.
Wow.
Well, I had to go out afterwards and put it down. But he was very good to me. He just, my dad, he phoned up the guy, he lived near Bulawayo, with the old Gaia phone, and told him, that I'd shot his cow. And the guy was very good. He said, don't worry about it. We'll use it for rations. And so I had to go and see him the next morning when he came out and apologized to him. But it was something I carried with shame for a long time. And but it had a sequel, because on one of my call-ups, I was with First Bat, and we were up at Kotwa, and we were in ambush. And there was obviously a curfew in the area for people, but there was also a cattle curfew. So we were up on the top of this hill, grassy hill, sort of a knoll, and the guy who was supposed to be on guard had fallen asleep. And I woke up to hear this crunch, 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 and it was literally 5 meters away. So I looked, checked that all the guys were there. It wasn't one of them had gone off for relieve themselves or something. And I kicked the guy next to me, but it was too late. And this noise came closer. And so I just leant over and double tapped twice over the edge, and blow me down. It was a cow. And it ran bellowing off into the distance, and it eventually died. But the sequel also to that was the tracer had set the grass alight and swept up our hill, so we had to evacuate our ambush position. But I think, as you know, the guerrillas were using cattle to cover tracks. So that cow shouldn't have been out. But in that case, I didn't quite feel the same remorse as I had for the first one. But it is in my book. I've written a chapter on it. So it's sort of my, I suppose, my confession, and it's called Two Unfortunate Cows. So it's the story
I'm
of those
surprised
two
you didn't get the nickname Rawhide or something like that.
Well, you talk of nicknames. Look, I'm ad-libbing it here, but on call-ups, I think what happened, I found that when I went in to do my national service, being a rifleman, but in later years, when I'd sort of matured a bit, I was still a rifleman, and I found that, I just felt maybe I should be leading some of these sticks we were in. So, but I hadn't had the training, so I was stuck with that. But at the time, it was in 1976, the Geneva talks were on in Geneva. And when we stopped for a break or something, I would always hive off with some binos and just be looking out. Whereas the guys with some of them would stand cooking their tea and what have you. But they started calling me Geneva because they said, "You're going to get caught and then you're going to end up in Geneva." I said, "No, it's you guys are going to end up in Geneva." So I got this nickname Geneva, which I thought wasn't well deserved. But it, once again, I think the training that we had with the likes of Jock Hutton, who I was in contact with probably about 5 years ago. He's died now. He was our company sergeant major. But we were on patrol up near Kotwa, and there were two sticks working together, and we were supposed to go into ambush, and the guys got lost. There's another word for it in the lingo of the Rhodesian army.
Yeah.
But the gunner and myself moved off the edge of the road and lay down, and these guys stood on the road, and we lost a guy because they'd walked into a bunch of these guys, and they were heavily armed. We knocked one off, and he was obviously a section commander because he had a folding butt AKM and a Makarov pistol. So he was obviously a senior guy. But
Yeah, good
my habit of going off and taking cover saved life, I think. There was a guy, it was tragic because he was a married man with children, and he didn't die straight away. He had a gunshot wound in the shoulder and in the groin. So they had to send a truck out. The 7th Squadron offered to fly in, but it was a dark night and they were refused to Kazovac because it was just, there was no horizon and they didn't have all the sort of goodies that they have in these aircraft today.
So he
but
must
the
have
truck
been
that came in,
hit in the femoral artery, was he?
yeah, I think so. He didn't. The truck arrived. It was ambushed on the way in as well by a
Oh,
different group, and so it was a bit of a hectic time. But he died on the way back to Kotter that evening. But as it happened, the guys who returned fire on that truck actually killed a few of these guys. But sadly, there was one of the guys had a stoppage on his MAG, and he got up to tighten his gas, and he got hit in the head and subsequently died. He was a chap called White. He actually got the Bronze Cross of Rhodesia, but he died that next morning. So yeah.
Was
But
that,
you know, we've all got these stories, and
yeah. Was that in
and
an armored plated vehicle, like a crocodile or something like that? Or was it
no, there was an open RL,
open back? Yeah.
sandbagged RL. Yeah.
Um,
Fortunately, none of them were injured when they were ambushed.
mm.
Um, so that was a bad night.
Mm.
And yeah, that's
Was I've never really talked to many guys from 1RR. Was that what they call a grandpa's battalion? Although you were young, it was predominantly guys in their late 30s or early
no,
30s.
not really. It was First
Yeah.
Battalion,
Okay.
1 Rhodesia Regiment. So it was based at the drill hall in Salisbury. So
That's
that's
right.
where we mustered. But it was basically made up of guys from Mashonaland. At first, I was posted to 10th Bat because I was from Shangani, but then they moved me up to one. So I never served with 10th Bat. But I was in with one first bat because I was in Matepatepa. So it wasn't, no, it definitely wasn't the old man's, but obviously, I mean, the guys were older in that they were on call-ups and they weren't national servicemen anymore.
Mm.
But there was a lot of young guys. In fact, the one section commander we were with that night ended up joining Scouts. He was, you know, young and capable.
It
Yeah,
might have been 5 or 8 RR. I know one of them was predominantly with older guys, but I get them mixed up. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. 8th Bat was, I think, also from the area, from Salisbury. 4th Bat was entirely. I don't remember all of the the guys anymore.
2, 6, and 9 from Bulawayo.
3, 6, and 9.
2, 6, and 9.
No, 2, 6, and 9.
Yeah,
Right.
3 was disbanded in Zambia, and so was 7.
Oh, okay.
So we had two. Yeah, first bat, second bat, third. No 3 bat. That was 4, 5, 6, 7th was disbanded in Zambia. 8th, 9th, and 10th. So we had 8 battalions.
Yeah, but I think as a sort of to wrap up my farming experience, I've been on, you know, continuous call up, and we'd been offered Christmas Day off if we had a successful contact, so which we had, a different one, but we ended up in Salisbury, and it was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So we were shipped in, and I remember that I was with the lute who was with me, and yeah, I had a girlfriend, but he said, okay, well, let's just go and visit her. And anyway, only Granny was there, but she sort of let on that she had eloped, and so I didn't even get a dear John. So he was really annoyed, you know, that this had happened. So he said, okay, well, we can't have this, you know, we got to go off. We went to the Monomatapa, and of course, all the Harare residents were all having their Christmas parties. Anyhow, the lute sort of, he sort of, I think around about 10, 11, he said, no, look, I've had enough. He says, but take my pips. So he gave me his pips, and I had a hell of a good time. You know, I mean, I just opened a door and there was a party going on, and you know, people were so patriotic and everything. come in, yeah, you must join us. And oh boy, it was a long, heavy night. And I had to obviously whip the pips off the next morning and give them back. And then we were back off into the bush. But that was just a little.
Could you describe that contact? What the successful one? What actually happened there, Hugh?
It actually was, yeah, it was interesting. We were just doing a sweep. And, I could speak quite a little bit of Shoshone because obviously I've been working on the farms. So we just noticed that this one kraal we had come across, they were just old men there. There were no women. So that immediately just, hang on, there's something going on here. So we did a little bit of discussion, and these guys disclosed to us that they were feeding up on the hill, just about a kilometer away. So we got into sort of extended line and then went up this really broken hill, and we were actually they initiated the contact because they were a hell of a well hidden. They'd seen us coming. So yeah, we returned fire and one of them was taken out then. But I'd also been running up a rock and down a rock, and I slipped and I fell and the butt plate of my FN came. So it was useless. So there I was in the middle of this lot with an absolutely useless FN. But I think the most terrifying thing was an Alouette 3, a chopper came over, to try and find these guys, but the rest had gone. And we'd still got a bit separated. So I was like thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to take me out any minute now. I did have a hat on with a day glow on the top, so unfortunately, it didn't happen.
That's when you rip off your shirt and show your white skin.
I didn't think you're doing that, but it's just disconcerting being in Indian territory with a useless weapon.
Those gunners were darn good. They probably would have picked up your profile quite easily. I don't know many tours that wore Rhodesian caps, so they would have.
Yeah, but it was sort of thick bush and rocky and things circling overhead. And
great guys, eh?
Yeah. So the Dayglow came in good use.
Oh, yeah.
And then at the end of that cooler, I got jaundice. So the army said to me, look, I was really sick, and obviously from bad water and stuff like that. And so I went back to the farm, and the military said, look, 6 months, don't bother coming back. And I went back to the farm, and I was just really sick. So Bob, the guy I worked for, is a fantastic guy. As I say, he's died. He said, go and I went to see the doctor in Bandura, and he said, no, you got bilharzia. And so I came back, and Bob said, there's no ways you've got bilharzia. So he sent me to his doctor in Salisbury, and he took one look at me. He says, you've got jaundice. I said, oh, well, I was diagnosed as bilharzia. He said, well, you're lucky you weren't treated for bilharzia, because that hammers your liver, when you treat it. So it was really at that point that I decided, I need to, I can't work, I can't be in the army. So that's when I went back to varsity and, finished where I left off 3 or 4 years ago before. And then I stayed down there. I met a South African girl and stayed down there.
And what degree was that in, Hugh?
I did a BCom, and then I did my CA. And then I've been in pretty much most of the time with the family business, in retail. So I ended up MD there, and then we sold to Pick and Pay, who, as you know, now is in big trouble, and they actually Boxer has bailed them out. We were marketing very much to the lower LSM, lower income groups, but the company had been built up over the years and has done extremely well. But after we were bought out, I stayed for 6 years and then said, no, that's it. I've had enough of corporate.
Yeah. So
So,
you're retired now, are you?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Lovely. Have you seen the alarm clock for retired people? It's got three settings. No, I'm not sure. Maybe later, or no, not today. On the alarm clock,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you just roll over and go back to sleep. It's awesome.
I had no problem with retirement. I had so much to do. I do a lot of photography, so I've got heaps of things to do, lots. And I then did some photography for a woman up in Maritzburg. It was on 40 old farmhouses, going back in the sort of Midlands area. So I did all the photography for that,
Mm.
and I enjoyed it. So I thought, I'm going to do this myself. So I've done 3 books.
Yes, we'll talk about those in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kept me busy, and writing story. Then my last book was on short stories. So I've been writing short stories,
Mm.
and that's still to be published.
Yes.
But, so I've had no problem with what do I do next. Kept myself really busy.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
This channel keeps me pretty busy, and it may look
Sure.
every week I was just interviewing another guy, but for every guy that comes on, I've had to try and negotiate, threaten, and half kill 9 other guys to come on and talk. And I'm forever chasing my tail, and I've got a spreadsheet of people that have said, yeah, yeah, I'll come on. Got this whole Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, yeah, I'll come on. I'll never hear from them again, which is really irritating. But it keeps me busy. And on the subject to your books,
Sorry, just before you go on, I mean, I think it's quite sad because, up
yeah,
here's the library and
yeah,
it goes.
it's
And I think
absolutely.
what you're doing and Hannes and the rest of the guys are doing is really, really important because it's part of history. I'm a historian. I love history.
Me
I've
too.
got a website, which you might have looked at, and I've photographed as much as I can in this province.
Yeah.
It's a website with 90,000 images on it, and it's unique in that every image I've taken, every single one,
Wow.
over a fixed period of time. So it's a photographic record of this province.
Mm.
And it's an open website. I don't charge anyone. I've got Google ads, and whatever I get from that, I give to a heritage society or something. And so I think it's really sad when people don't record what's happened to themselves for their children's sake. My
Absolutely.
my
And
mother was in the British Army for 7 years, and she was in Palestine and Egypt and Libya and Italy and India. And to my disgrace, I never sat her down and actually grilled her and got her story. And
it's all
that's
gone.
very sad.
It's
It's
all gone.
gone. It's all
Those
gone.
memories are gone. And every time I talk to some guy or go onto Facebook, some of the guys died, and they got the rest in peace plaques up, and it's tragic because we are now like the Second World War guys, or the guys that fought in Vietnam. We've all seen their videos and how wonderful. But we've got to do this. And I'm glad to see the South Africans with Legacy Conversations have got thousands of videos up now. And we interacting with each other, which is wonderful. Got a lot of South Africans that fought in Rhodesia.
Yeah, as I said to you, I'm like a minnow in the military sort of field, but we've all had experiences,
Of course.
and there are probably people better who can tell a much better story than I can. But
And it's very rare to get quality speakers as well. I don't say that with disrespect to anybody, but I get frustrated when guys come on and they said, "Oh yeah, we had a good day. There was 64 bodies at the end of my machine gun at the end of the day," but they don't tell you how it happened, what the feelings were like, what their emotions were like after,
emotions.
how they got into that situation, It's just, I killed 63 people, and I get really depressed when that type of comment comes on board because it's not telling us anything.
Mm. Mm.
But anyway, I guess
Yeah.
some guys don't really want to dwell on that. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I think quite a defining point came for me. It was in 1976, was when South Africa put the screws on us. And we were up at Nyamapanda, and the brigadier came and said, because the guys were very upset about, what had been conceded. And he said, guys, there's no option. We've got no oil, ammunition. It's been chopped off.
Yeah.
And that's sort of when I realized that, we actually are, we're a puppet in this whole thing,
Very much so.
And sadly, a lot of people went on to pay the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Which,
it's all the big industrialists. They were after the natural resources, and it's just a big game worldwide. It's happening right now all over the place. And I'm convinced that governments don't run their countries. There's a very nasty, powerful cadre of people behind them that are pulling the strings, and they don't care about humanity. They don't care who suffers, so long as they get what they want out of it. Because for any decent government to force the likes of Mugabe, forget about the white people. We're talking about 8 or 10 million black people, half of whom have had to leave the country. For any conscientious Western government to force that upon us is nothing less than evil.
Yeah.
And it's the equivalent of 150 million people leaving America. What happened to us?
Yeah. I think the one thing that does irritate me is that, Rhodesians have got a very bad name.
Yes.
And so I think some of the behavior of the guys, brings that on. But, a lot of it's just political nonsense. And, I remind people that a large proportion of our security forces were black guys. And a lot of them gave everything, their lives. And so a lot of the criticism that we have is totally unfounded.
Which makes these stories even more pertinent, because we're telling you what's happened, and it contradicts a lot of the rubbish that's been spouted about us. So it's really important. Guys, if you're out there, just come on. My email address should be on here. Come forward. Let's talk about your books. You've published 3. You've got a 4th one on short stories, 75 short stories.
Yeah, I'll show you. Does that show up?
Raise it higher, slightly more. That's it. Yeah. Now, did you know all of those people, or are they just people that their stories touched your heart?
No, there's a connection to all these people.
Right.
So if you have a look here, this guy was killed in the Second World War. His name was Mortimer, and my name is Hugh George Mortimer Bland, which has been I've always been ragged, but I was named in honor of him. He was killed, and his grave is in the Egypt, or Libyan desert.
Wow.
This is an old chap.
Raise the book up again, so it's level with your glasses.
Yeah. Okay. This guy here is an old chap. He's a headman, Sishlashlo, and I've got this image. And he used to come and see my father every year, and they used to have long chats. My dad used to give him a bag of maize, even though he could hardly afford to do it. But they were great friends, and he was actually a herds boy for Lobengula, believe it or not. He was nearly 100 when I last saw him in the sort of early 60s.
Wow.
And he gave my dad a walking stick that I've still got. It's and I've taken it everywhere, and it's a story in the book about the traveling walking stick given by this guy.
Fantastic.
This guy here is Richard Smith.
If you could raise it up again, it's right below the camera.
Yeah.
A little bit higher. Yeah, if you could put it almost on your shoulder. Yeah, Rich Smith. I knew him very well. Lovely guy.
Yeah, so I've written a story on him, and I've been in touch with his sister, Shenny. And it's a tragic story because Richard was killed, and he lost Shen lost the middle brother, Kevin, from sickness. And Trevor, the youngest guy, was killed
Yeah.
by dissidents in 1983. So she lost her three brothers. But Richard he was with Parks and Wildlife, and he was a tracker. And it's actually called the Battle of Chabara Hills, where he was taken out.
Well, a little story on Rich. I worked for Internal Affairs in Plumtree.
Oh, yeah.
The deputy commissioner, deputy district guy, knew Rich quite well and took us down to his house in Matopos, I think it was.
Yeah.
And he had very kindly arranged for about 20 nurses to come from the trainee hospital in Bulawayo, and all these girls pitched up, and there's about 40 of us randy guys all there in this busload, and it was a fantastic party. I mean, he was a real gentleman through the whole thing, and I remember there was a big rock out the back, and I bought myself this beautiful 9mm rifle, and we had shooting competitions at the back there, and it was a spectacular day. I mean, that's all I know of Rich, but he was such a nice guy.
Yeah, you're a hell of a nice chap.
Mm.
Yeah. So each of these stories have some significance. I mean, that's Jock Hutton at his wedding.
Oh, right.
Which I obviously managed to get hold of that picture.
Yeah.
There's a story to this here. This is
You can see
Caesar Hull.
Okay.
He was born at Leichdale at Shangani, and he became a fighter ace. But he was doing stunt flying in Britain, and then he became a fighter ace, and he was killed. His base was Tangmere in Kent.
Oh.
And there was a memorial at Shangani. It's called the Pongo Memorial, and my uncle's plaque is up there. His was up there, and his plaque disappeared. And I was doing some research, and then I found out that the plaque was in the Tangmere Museum. So I thought, jeepers, this is a national monument. And then I wondered if my uncle's piece of brass, big pieces of brass. And so I phoned the squadron leader, who was now the curator of the museum. And I said, look, I'm coming to the museum tomorrow. I want to see this plaque. He says, what do you want it for? Why are you interested? He was very, it's quite agitated. So I walked in there yesterday, and they'd done next day, and they'd done a really good display. And his grave's next to the churchyard there. And I walked in, and he said, you know this belongs here, don't you? So I said, just relax. I said, I agree with you. I was hoping that I'd find my uncle's plaque here. But what had happened is his younger sister and family had arranged to have the plaque removed. And on the first attempt, they had a hammer chiseling away at it, and they were fired at, and they had to abandon the job. And anyhow, they came back and managed to get it down.
Good for them.
And smuggle it out the country. There's a story to that as well. So this is a story about a guy that's the story. It's called The Missing Plaque. Just to give you an idea of.
And when is that book due for publication? It looks like something I'd love to buy.
This is the proof.
Yeah.
So I'll sign it off. It's now the printers have got a print.
Excellent. Will it be available overseas on Amazon and stuff, or only through?
I sell privately. All my books I sell privately. Only because the bookshops expect such a markup.
A huge cut, yeah.
It outprices the book.
Well, I get £3 out of £28 for my retail sales price. So it's ridiculous. The printers and the...
And is that on Amazon?
Yeah, they take everything.
What I'm thinking of doing is putting it on Kindle.
Yeah, good.
Trying that. And then, because I think a lot of the diaspora will be interested. They're hungry for stories and...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is not all about Rhodesia. Can you see that?
If you can raise the tire and bring it to the camera.
There's a 455 Webley and Scott.
Oh, yes. Oh, beautiful handgun, isn't it?
Yeah. Which I had to leave in Zim.
Oh, no.
But the thing's called Four Wars.
Yeah.
because this was used in the Boer War. My grandfather used it when he was doing service, and my father, and then I used it. So I call it Four Wars.
Oh,
A little
fantastic.
story.
That's going to
But
be
yeah, there's sort of
really-
anecdotes. This is Jock
yes.
Hutton. He was CSM. He was interesting. I mean, he was a little Scotsman with language to match, and he was our company sergeant major. And he was in the Paras, and he jumped into Normandy with the Para Regiment in 1944, 6th of June 1944. And he then served in Palestine, in Aden, can't remember, there were a couple of other places. And then he joined the SAS in Northern Rhodesia. And then when the Federation broke up, he came down to Southern Rhodesia. And he was the first, I think, CSM of the SAS in Rhodesia.
Fantastic.
But he was then posted to Depot, Llewellyn Barracks, for training. And I mean, he was an absolute character, really such a good man. I mean, he could sort you out, but, you know, he had a bit of a disdain for fresh subalterns who were giving the troops a hard time, you know, and he said, these are my troops. And he then came down to South Africa and joined Recce's, I think 5 Recce's. And then obviously he wasn't getting any pension, so he had to go back to England. And then he jumped into Normandy again, aged 83, 84, and 88 with his Para Regiment. They looked after him. They took him under their wing, and he jumped into Normandy twice on a tandem pursuit. Real character.
Yeah. Those type of stories are heartwarming. You want to sit by a roaring fire with a glass of whiskey and read that. It's just so heartwarming.
Well, that's on the back page here. The write-up here. I say, sit back, preferably around a campfire, enjoy the storytelling.
There you go. There you go.
There you go. You've got it.
Got the writer's bent, eh?
Yeah.
Well, Hugh, it's been a lovely journey down memory lane, and thank you so much for coming on board. It's been a very interesting chat, and it's at this point I'd like to appeal to people to please come forward and give their talks, and to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps with the algorithms, and I'm sure that John will show the other 3 books at this point in time, and you can look at the covers on those. But John, thank you very much. I mean, Hugh, thank you very much for coming aboard. My brain's a bit fried this time of the day. Thank you very much for coming on board. I really appreciate it. Hey,
Tony, I really appreciate it. I hope that people find it interesting and keep up the good work, because,
thank you.
as I said, I'm a historian, and I just believe it's important that these stories must be told. Absolutely. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hugh. Okay, God bless. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.